Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for our Native Issues Forum. Today, we're joined by the Alaska Regional Coalition's Government Affairs Consultant, Jordan Marshall, who will be providing an update on the state's budget and talking a little bit about what our legislative tribal priorities are for this legislative season. We've been working with Jordan for about 5 years now. Jordan has really worked well with our team, and in fact, I refer to him as my favorite Glaikah. He's doing a great job on our behalf. Welcome, Jordan, and thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Thank you, President Peterson. It's a pleasure to be here, and always a pleasure to work with you and the team. Just for a little self-intro, I was born in Haines, Alaska, just a couple miles up the Lynn Canal and downstream from Klukwan on the Chilkat River. Nearly 50 years ago, we're creeping up on mid-century for me here. I've spent the last 20 years working in direct contact with the Alaska State Legislature, and about 11 of those here now as a lobbyist in one form or another, as an independent for the last 5-6 years. So previous to working as an independent lobbyist and strategic consultant, spent many fantastic years at Rasmussen Foundation, getting my wings. Previous to that, spent some time working in media. Also served back at the turn of the century as a legislative staffer, and also at Institute of the North, and currently serve on a number of boards. My clients today are typically municipalities, help serve the Alaska Municipal League and the Municipality of Anchorage, and also, of course, the Alaska Regional Coalition, which we'll go into in more detail here in a few minutes. Pleasure to be here, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with the nation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jordan, and you really do a phenomenal job on our behalf of our coalition, and we really do enjoy working with you. And I think it's been proven, and something that we've learned through the years, that unity between our regions provides greater influence. And that's why back in 2015, Tlingit Haida, along with several tribal nonprofits, signed a memorandum of agreement to establish the Alaska Regional Coalition. This consortium was developed to combine our strengths and provide advocacy on state legislative issues, with the ultimate goal to achieve favorable political policy and shift state policy towards greater recognition of tribes. Those partners are Chukmachuk, Manila, Coeric Incorporated, and Tanana Chiefs Conference. Jordan, can you talk a little bit more about your role with the Alaska Regional Coalition and who we are, who we represent, and why it's important that we have a good pulse on the legislative sessions?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, President Peterson. The Alaska Regional Coalition, as you noted, is made up of 5 Native regional nonprofits, one of them a Native regional tribe, Tlingit Haida, and together comprise 100 communities in the state of Alaska, and represent roughly 65,000 people. That's a whole heck of a lot of folks who now, standing together shoulder to shoulder, have the opportunity to together unified voice. I heard a little repeat echo. The Regional Coalition is a consensus organization, and so while each of the regional nonprofit members have their own priorities, where they overlap is the area where we take decisive action. And all of the organizations provide some measure of medical, behavioral, social health, public safety, workforce development programs. And we contract with the state, and in some cases compact with the state, to deliver those services on behalf of the state, where the state of Alaska either has no presence whatsoever or a desire to partner with effective organizations that can deliver services on its behalf. We're jumping forward a little bit too quickly for me. Let's roll back. Thanks. Regional Coalition in its genesis decided to focus on a handful of overarching specifics as its guiding principles. And one of them is to pursue budget equity, regional budget equity. And what that means essentially is if the legislature or the administration is considering appropriations that in some way might leave behind the people of rural Alaska, then it isn't equitable, is it? We might have to draw attention to that and sometimes urge lawmakers to make more considered decisions so that each Alaskan is treated equally. You know, equal protection is fundamental to the state constitution and the US Constitution. And we urge people to look at budget issues from that perspective. Another area of overlap among all the members of the regional coalition is an emphasis for public safety and helping to provide public safety in communities across the state. As we've learned, 1 in 3 communities in the state of Alaska has 0 public safety presence. It's unheard of to imagine that for a lot of people in Alaska, and it's important that we make sure that that's not forgotten. So, and among other things, regional coalition members, 4 out of 5 of them are actually contractors with the Department of Public Safety to provide village public safety officers. And we've been working closely with the lawmakers and the administration over the years to ensure that that program is working as well as it could. There's room for improvement, and we've been part of an ongoing dialogue about ways to make that better. I'm excited that that's the topic of conversation this year as well. Another thing that we would do is, as the Alaska Regional Coalition, is to help educate lawmakers and staff and the public about some misconceptions, try to demystify and provide clarity about issues that people wouldn't necessarily think about. And one of them being indirect rates, where we provide service on behalf of the state through contract or compact. We're in some cases having to also pay for overhead, and in some cases that drives some people crazy. But the state has overhead, administrative costs. Private corporations have overhead, administrative costs. But in some cases, people don't believe that should be applied also to grantees of the state. And that's a conversation that's typically ongoing. And with turnover in the legislature every 2 years, it's important to help provide information to lawmakers who might otherwise not have full appreciation for what it costs to deliver services in remote rural parts of the state. A quick example of that, and then I'll quit motor mouthing here for a second, is that we all know that costs of goods and services and energy and healthcare and ad nauseum in Alaska is greater than it is in a metropolitan area in the contiguous United States. Why is that? Distance from market, economy of scale. Well, the same thing applies to remote rural Alaska. And it shouldn't come as a blinding surprise to anybody that things just typically cost more to deliver equal service. And that's something that we hope to impart when sharing priorities and challenges of delivering essential services in our 100 communities. Okay, next slide. Thanks. So as I noted, we have numerous intersections with the state budget. Primarily, actually, more often than not, in the Department of Health and Social Services, because many members of the Alaska Regional Coalition are tribal health organizations or are sister organizations to nonprofits that provide health and social services, behavioral health services. We're foursquare, front and center, overlapped and intertwined with the Department of Health and Social Services in dozens of places. And so we engage in advocacy and in encouraging folks to understand the challenges and opportunities of working with partners to deliver essential services. And in some cases, it's important for people to see that Native regional nonprofits, Alaska Native regional nonprofits and tribal health organizations are in some cases the pinnacle of efficiency and of compassionate and professional delivery of services, and that we have a lot to offer the state when it comes to achieving its goals and missions and constitutional obligations. So I'm excited to say that, I spent a whole heck of a lot of time watching the HES committees in the House and the Senate, paying attention to what happens at the Department of Health and Social Services, and also in the finance subcommittees as the budget architects in the state capitol work to try and deliver services with limited resources. Next. Thanks. So what have we got in front of us this year? President Peterson, the state budget is a complicated, multi-track process. And over the next couple of slides, and I'll make it quick so that we can get to questions from the audience and bills that we're tracking. We just want to point out that the budget for the next fiscal year is actually a suite of budget bills that are introduced in both bodies. The House and the Senate each have versions of each of these. A proposed FY22 operating budget. FY22 starts in July 1st, and we're working on, I'd say the legislature is working on proposals that the governor proposed for the fiscal year 22. And that includes an operating budget. It includes a capital budget. It includes a mental health budget. It includes a fast track supplemental and a regular supplemental budget. So there's actually add one more here. And then in this case, a handful of other bills that are supposed to kind of intermingle with the budget and help get us to the next year. And the governor's proposed a general obligation bond package that would help with a backlog of projects, infrastructure projects, help provide jobs and infrastructure in the state of Alaska. Governor proposed a suite of constitutional amendments, which I think I have a slide on that coming up in a second. A fairly complex and important kind of pivot point, or at a juncture in the state of Alaska history where we really have to think about our place as it relates to how do we pay for state government that we want, and to what extent does that also include a dividend? We're at a decision-making point, and the constitutional amendments the governor proposes include some suggestions about how to move through this critical juncture in time. I'd also note that the governor has not proposed any new revenue measures for the last 20 or so years. The state has known that we are going to find ourselves here. Contemplation of whether or not a broad-based tax is necessary to help pay for essential state services has been one of the components that everybody can consider. It's either rejects or embraces or something in between. But in this case, we don't have that on the table. Several lawmakers have introduced some potential revenue measures, and we may be able to touch on those during Q&A. One of the things that we can say about this suite of bills is that the proposal avoids significant cuts, right? Over the last several years, there's been, I would say the last 6 years, it's been a concerted effort and a successful effort to downsize, to find efficiencies, to reform departments, to overhaul the way we deliver services, to cut programming altogether, to reduce appropriations to programs that used to enjoy extraordinary largesse, right? And over the last couple of years, we found that proposals to cut any deeper met with extreme pushback, not only from the public, but from lawmakers as well. And this particular budget proposal does not really propose to cut any deeper. We may have gotten to a point where, for the most part, near unanimity about the size of the state government. Now, some people say that's ridiculous. Of course, we can always cut more, and that's true. But I think we found that we may have reached the kind of length of people's appetite to make substantial, significant, easy cuts. The cuts have already been done. They're talking about appropriations limits, and those are legitimate questions to raise under the circumstances, and you'll find one of those in the constitutional amendments as part of this year's budget package. The rub is that the only way to pay for essential state services and for any kind of dividend is to, and is proposed in December when this package was rolled out for consideration, is to literally double dip into the earnings reserve of the permanent fund. And by that, I mean the legislature several years ago set a limit on how much you can take out of the earnings reserve of the permanent fund. The permanent fund is made up of principal and earnings. They're all kind of managed together. The earnings are subject to appropriation, regular old appropriation. And the legislature said, oh, goodness, this is dangerous. You could just spend down all those earnings. You should set a limit on how much you could take so that you don't ever diminish the earning power of the permanent fund. And that's called the percent of market value. And the limit is 5% a year. And that's roughly $3 billion that's spun off every year. And for the last 3 years, the legislature has been using those earnings to help pay for essential state services and a downsized dividend. The budget proposal that's on the table right now in Juneau suggests double dipping, blowing past that 5% limit by almost 100% in order to pay the so-called full statutory dividend last year and this year, and a flat budget. So we're in a pickle. The legislature knows it, the governor knows it, the public, I hope, knows it. We're in a pickle. We got to get through this, and we got to figure out how to pay for it. In any event, the constitutional amendment package identifies this pickle, suggests that we change the formula for calculating dividends, suggests that we continue to direct some of those earnings every year toward paying for state government, and recognizes that we haven't paid any kind of substantial capital project for infrastructure in the last, since 6 years. The fine print, and this is important, that the 10-year projections for the state budget going forward, even if you were to change the formula and have smaller dividends, smaller amount going to the state government as well to help pay for services, even if you make these steps and continue to downsize government every year a little bit, you still have $1 billion budget deficit going forward every year for the next 10 years and maybe longer. So this is the pickle. The budget process right now, where are we in the budget process? The House and the Senate finance committees are broken into finance subcommittees. They're working through the minutia. They're going line by line through the budget, trying to figure out if there's anything that needs to move over here, adjust up or down. They're pretty much on track to produce a budget in the normal pace and during the constitutional 121-day legislative session. But how can they do that and also pay a dividend? That's the question that everyone's grappling with, whether they know it or not. Okay, next slide. This is details about what's in the capital budget, details about what's in the operating budget. It's probably not helpful to dive into it. I'll just kind of pause and take a breath here. Let's take a look at it. Oh boy. Oh yeah, here's a little fun fact. Looking at the capital budget, it has it's actually a pair of bills, because in this case, the capital budget relies on passing a bond bill, separate from the general obligation bond bill, but a bond bill that would invite the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation to go out for $100 million in bonds, and that $100 million in bonds would help complement, round out the $158 million capital budget. And inside that capital budget is all the village safe water and wastewater projects. So if you want the state to have adequate ante to get the full federal funding for the village safe water and wastewater projects, you also want to love this AHFC bond bill. Fun fact. All right, next slide. So the mental health budget, the Constitution created a mental health lands trust and a settlement to a suit a number of years ago, 20 plus, I should know. I'm sorry to my friends at the Alaska Mental Health Trust. But there was a settlement that created essentially the equivalent of an endowment. The Mental Health Trust supports the operating budget and the capital budget with contributions from their funds, and they have to, for technical reasons, run as a separate bill. So you'll always see a mental health budget moving alongside the operating budget as it moves its way through the legislative session, and the component parts of the mental health budget often complement similar identically named line items. And so let's just say the state kicks in $5 for a program, the trust kicks in $2, it's $7 of an appropriation if it's all approved and signed at the end of the year. So they blend funds, the general fund and the mental health funds. It's an oversimplification, but it's an explanation for why there's an extra bill. And then the supplemental budget this year was last year the biggest supplemental in Alaska state history. It was needed to look back and pay for what was intended cuts to the Department of Health and Social Services, unrealized deficiencies and whatnot. We had the largest supplemental budget last year. This one may be a contender because it contains a so-called top-off 2020 dividend. So this is part of the challenge legislature faces this year when considering the proposed FY22 budget. Do we have the ability to pay for a full dividend from last year and full dividend this coming year? The answer is no, if you want to stay within the 5% of market value limit of draws from the earnings reserve. So what are we going to do? I don't know. Let's find out. We'll see in the next couple of months. All right, next slide. So I mentioned there's a suite of constitutional amendments. One is to enshrine the PFD in the Constitution with a split of approximately 50% to dividends, 50% to the state. The state's been relying on these earnings reserve dollars for the last 3 years to pay for essential services. Why? Look, you know what? For the last 40 years, we've had a state budget that was constructed 80+% out of oil revenue. That number is down near 20% now. It's a massive sea change. And why did that happen? One is reduced throughput, so less oil flowing, not for lack of trying, not for lack of technology, not for lack of exploration, not for lack of anything. Everybody wants, not everybody, most people want aggressive, environmentally sensitive, but productive exploration and production of oil on the North Slope. And we had a peak in 1989 of 2 billion barrels flowing a day through taps, and today it's about 400,000 to 500,000 barrels a day. So we're running at about a quarter capacity. It doesn't mean the pipe is only a quarter full, it just means it's going 4 times slower. Okay, but the point is there's less oil, and something we have zero control over is the global price of oil. And the price of oil has gone down. It might go up yesterday and we can get excited and stuff, but long and short of it is nowhere near what it was worth in recent history. So less oil, worth less per barrel, means less revenue. And so we've gone from a state that had 80+% of our entire budget paid for by oil to a state that has 20% roughly paid for by oil. So that's why the earnings reserve is so important right now. The permanent fund in its long-term health is so important right now. If you spend down the permanent fund, if you overspend from the permanent fund, you have less money coming from the permanent fund every year in the future. And we need that because we no longer have the kind of funding coming in from traditional oil revenues. So the governor recognizes this, legislature recognizes this, proposes that we rejigger how we split the earnings reserve. It's a step in the right direction to acknowledge it. Don't know how we're going to resolve it. But I would say this about the constitutional amendments. They require 2/3 support in both the House and the Senate and a positive vote from the people. If you've been watching how closely the House and the Senate are kind of aligned or high-centered or philosophically balanced, however you want to say it, it takes little time to get anywhere close to a majority. And a majority is not 2/3. It's going to be a high hurdle to get constitutional amendments across either body or both bodies. So these concepts may have to be contemplated as statutory or budgetary changes in the absence of constitutional amendments. We shall see, right? Governor also, as I mentioned before, proposes a spending cap. There's a legislative version of it. This essentially says, hey, you know what, we want to make sure that if we do have some influx of cash, if the grand old boom days come back, we don't overspend it. We aren't stuck in this situation again when it goes bust. How do we make sure we don't grow the budget to meet the income, but instead manage more frugally when we have funds? See how that goes. I mentioned the GEO bond, so let's move on to the next. As I mentioned, there's no proposed answer to the question of how do we deal with $1 billion hole in the budget next year and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that. As you can see on the right here, there's a graph suggesting what Alaskans do when they have money to spend. Okay, so the red bars are the statutory budget reserve, the blue bars are the constitutional budget reserve, and far left is 2012. So in the last 9 years, we dropped from roughly $16 billion in savings down to near zero. We've got fumes in the tank, folks, and the only place to go is the earnings reserve, and do we want to overdraw them is the key question. Now, I always hear people say we wasted $16 billion, but every freshly paved highway, every new school in your community, every we paid down retirement debt obligation to the tune of billions of dollars to help lower the cost of annual debt obligation. This is not all wasted money. And everybody, as I say, I mean, if you're driving on a road, that wasn't wasted money, was it? I'm not saying there weren't like things that we could have done without, obviously. But to just blow this off as if it was some stupid, spending spree without looking at what we've done as a state to continue to move forward and provide essential services. And by that, I mean, do you like having a trooper? Do you like having a teacher? Do you like having, a safe place in your community because dangerous people are held behind bars? That's what this money goes for. So I just ask you to ask yourself, was it all a waste? Next slide. Cool. No longer are we talking about long-term issues. Here's some real near-term issues. But I guess the first one here is actually a long-term issue too. The executive order to split or bifurcate the Department of Health and Social Services. Breaking news, if you hadn't heard it already this morning, the governor withdrew the executive order 119 to bifurcate the Department of Health and Social Services, citing technical issues. Here's the deal, right? An executive order can either be left alone and become law, or it can be voted to be stopped, and it's several steps to do that. And the legislature was inching toward taking those steps toward stopping it. And why? Because the limit of what you can do in an executive order is that you can reorganize executive functions if you're the executive, and it's totally, that's the Constitution says that's cool. But you can't change statute, right? No substantive changes in statute. And it became evident that there may be dozens of instances of statutory adjustments that happened to be embedded by error, likely, I don't know, in that executive order. So the governor says, okay, let's pull it. We're going to redo it and resubmit it. bifurcating, splitting the Department of Health and Social Services. The state's largest department, rightly described as a mega agency. It is one of the most complicated and challenging and bureaucratic and far-reaching and diverse in its service offerings department in the state of Alaska. I've always said the toughest job in the state of Alaska may well be the commissioner of the Department of Health and Social Services. But then I think, well, and then every division director has it tough too, and at the Department of Health and Social Services. It's a tough gig, and it's very complex. And the governor has suggested, and he's not alone, hey, you know what, maybe it would be better to put more personnel, kind of compartmentalize this into two different things and maybe try and solve some of the problems. Let's get some more people focused on each of the component parts of the department. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's clearly going to continue to be an ongoing conversation as the legislature proceeds this year. A couple other items to watch. Central Council Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska Executive Committee passed a resolution in opposition to the ballot custody bill, SB 39, citing that there is no evidence of election fraud in the state, that efforts to limit access to voting by mail are efforts that disenfranchise democracy, right? The exercise of democracy. I just want to point out that this bill was observed to be a bill that might have produced some problems in that area. It's my understanding, members of the House, once they organized, said even if that bill made it over to the House, made it through the Senate to the House, that it wouldn't stand a chance there. So what I would observe when talking about bills to watch, and in this one in particular, is that there are a number of other election bills introduced this year, and you just want to be on the lookout for different parts of that bill maybe showing up in others, kind of things. When President Peterson said, what do I do for the regional coalition, it would be tracking things like that, looking out for potential little parts from that bill, moving into other bills. Exciting opportunity here, the SB 78, Healthcare Services by Telehealth. Telehealth is one of the most extraordinary, great stories to tell in the state of Alaska, increasing access to much needed healthcare for less cost, less travel. Telehealth, we're again a world global pioneer in many ways, thanks to the tribal health organizations in the state of Alaska. This bill, there was conversation last time it was discussed it was in Senate Labor and Commerce about potentially, I hope that was right, it might be the wrong committee, but potentially amending it to include provisions that clarify that behavioral health services could also be included in this expansion of and kind of extension of issues that were allowable during the emergency disaster declaration. So this is kind of an exciting opportunity. SB 81, Senator Donald Olson of Golovin introduced a bill that was on the move last session in the 31st legislature. We're in the 32nd now. Senate Bill 81 is the product of a multi-year effort to have meaningful stakeholder engagement, including tribes and communities and law enforcement and lawmakers. It's a bicameral, bipartisan effort to see what can be done to improve the Village Public Safety Officer program. And that bill is kind of the embodiment of all that work. It has not yet received a hearing this year, but when it does, it'll be an exciting thing to watch. Would encourage everybody to look at the recommendations from the Village Public Safety Officer Working Group. Again, as I said, it was bicameral and bipartisan, and the culmination of meaningful stakeholder engagement. Pretty exciting opportunity to help provide better services in rural Alaska. Extending the disaster emergency, as you know, on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, the existing and multiple extension versions of the emergency COVID-19 disaster emergency declaration expired. The House is still working on the governor's bill. The Commissioner of Department of Health and Social Services indicated that the administration doesn't consider, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that we're still in the same emergency, and so is not pushing for this bill. Nevertheless, the House is continuing to advance it to keep the conversation alive, because there are elements within the original disaster declaration that helps make it possible to streamline procurement for vaccination and testing, and I think there's 200 elements in there, regulations that were suspended or extended or changed in order to accommodate the work that needs to be done while we're still in a pandemic. I would urge you to remember that we're still in a pandemic. I'm excited about being vaccinated and the availability of vaccinations. We've done it well in the state of Alaska, and that's in no small part thanks to the extraordinary work of tribal health organizations. I mean, I can't, we do it right, don't we, President Peterson?
That's right. I think we're very fortunate to have our tribal health organizations. You know, we set the example for the whole nation, and actually the whole nation's taking recognizing that now, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's exciting. That being said, I've likened to kind of letting our guard down now to, you know, if you were to have a internal infection and you know, in your abdomen or something, and the doctor gives you a 21-day course of penicillin, and you start feeling better 2 weeks in, and you stop taking your penicillin. Is that what the doctor told you to do? No, you're supposed to continue the full course, and when you don't see it through, your infection can blow back up, right? And you have to start over again. I think it's worth it to take the kind of precautions necessary to get us through this. In any event, the House is still working on its disaster declaration emergency declaration bill. It moved from the House and Social Services Committee on Tuesday. It's being heard this afternoon in the House Finance Committee. There has been long rumored a disaster declaration light package being worked on in the Senate. We'll see whether or not that kind of transpires. We're expecting to see it maybe earlier this week, but they've had their hands full with other things. I would only note that, you know, we hope that whatever comes out of the legislature would be the kind of thing that would allow for extension of being able to receive federal supports at this time, whether it's in the form of supplemental nutrition benefits, the SNAP benefits, or, you know, dozens of other provisions. There's still need. We're not out of the woods yet. We're really close. I just hope we can see it through. That's just me, and maybe most Alaskans. Okay. What else are we watching at? Oh my gosh, this is really exciting. Another House bill. Last session, the first time it was introduced. This is the second. This is House Bill 123, State Recognition of Tribes. President Peterson spoke eloquently about this during the last session in the House Special Committee on Tribal Affairs. The role of tribes and how we can be extraordinary partners with the state. I certainly wouldn't presume to steal his thunder, so I'd pause here to maybe invite you, President Peterson, to say a word about what kind of significance it might be if the state were to consider recognizing tribes. And as preface to that, would it matter if the state didn't recognize tribes, since you're already the real deal?
Yeah, you know, that's the interesting thing, Jordan, is we've been operating very successfully without the recognition. The irony is not lost on me either, that while the state has never formally recognized tribes or our sovereignty, they constantly are asking us to waive our sovereign immunity to receive any funding or grants or in any partnerships. So, I think the question is this something that's really gonna produce something tangible, or is it something that's just a formality? And I think it's somewhere in between. I think, as we have been compacting some services, as we begin to do that, there's conversations to compact others like Department of Education and corrections and things like that. That recognition really should happen. It's hard to work with somebody who formally won't recognize your sovereignty, your existence, but you know, I'm excited by it. I've been really appreciative of Representative Zokolsky, who's sponsored this bill. She's also the chair of the Tribal Affairs Committee, which is our tribal assembly put forward or actually it was through our executive council, a resolution asking them to formalize that committee and to keep it a standing committee. And we're hopeful that that'll happen.
Good.
So,
Yeah, on that point, I would also note that former Speaker Representative Bryce Edgman was the one who kind of initiated standing up at that special committee, and a debt of gratitude is owed to him and his colleagues for standing up the House Special Committee on Tribal Affairs.
absolutely.
What could be said about like compacting and recognition? Are there opportunities? We just spent a little bit of time talking earlier about the pickle the state is in as it relates to kind of our financial situation. Are there opportunities for collaboration with the federal government through compacting and recognition that might help alleviate some of the financial burden strain the state is experiencing?
I think it could open up some revenue streams, and I think that it can reduce costs as well. I think that, whatever your politics are, it seems like the last 3 governors have all talked about compacting in some form or working together, from Parnell, Walker, and now Dunleavy. So I think they all recognize that there's some real potential there. We have the OCS compact. When you talk about children in state custody, and over 60% of them are Alaska Native children, it seems like we would be best served to be the ones dealing with some of those issues, right? I think when you talk about rural Alaska and education, I think we've proven time and again that tribes are in a position to better deliver and work. And so I think that these compacts can be extremely beneficial. The problem is, though, from the tribe's perspective, I think, is that don't hand us the goods without handing us the tools, i.e. funding, to address it. So don't think you're going to hand us the problem and we'll bring our own money. It's going to have to be funded, and it's going to have these agreements are going to have to be in place that really empower us to do the work that we need to do.
Right. The state doesn't ask, the DOT doesn't ask Granite Construction to build a highway for free.
Right.
But they enter into contracts with and outsource work all the time, every day, right?
Every day. And a lot of folks, that's the point, right? Like, you want less government, then that's comes down to compacting and contracting, I think. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So,
especially in places where the state may feel it's challenged to be able to deliver what it believes is the best service. I mean, child welfare being one of those areas. I mean, if we've got a system that needs more attention, maybe we should be giving it, partnering with somebody who can deliver the services, maybe in ways that we're unable to.
Well, and the tribes are there. We're on the ground. The state of Alaska doesn't even have a presence in some of these communities. They have to fly in if there's an emergency, that's weather dependent for an OCS worker to fly in. There's so many hurdles, but the tribes are there. We have staff, we have ability, we have the capacity to deliver services.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get off on a tangent there, and I know we want to allow time for some of the questions.
Yep, fair enough. Well, this is a moment where I realized that I had kind of skipped one of my own points earlier, and it does have to do with the kind of ability of working with tribes, though. And I'm not going to ask to jump back in slides, but where we were talking about the intersections with the state budget, and I mentioned Medicaid. One of the most extraordinary things about services delivered by tribal health organizations is that they're 100% federally reimbursable, and that over the last, was it 5 years since SB 74, the Medicaid overhaul bill was reform bill was passed, which also allowed for care coordination agreements with tribal health organizations and non-tribal organizations that provide healthcare services. Tribal claiming, meaning dollars that are recovered from the federal government instead of having to be paid for out of the state general fund, have reached $250 million in just these last 5 years. That's money that the state hasn't paid out that it otherwise would have, and thanks to partnerships with Alaska's tribes. So it's just one example of where we can make that kind of change if we work together.
Right. Well, thank you, Jordan. I know presenting the budget isn't the most exciting information, but really it truly is if you understand the impacts. We live and die by these budgets. If you, like you said, if you want to drive on new roads, if you want runway lights for remote runways, you want clinics and all these other things, schools, everything is dependent on these budgets. And so, it's really important to have an understanding to be engaged. And, I want to remind our tribal citizens that there is a process for you to participate. And, we can share that information, we can share links, but when there's bills, reach out to your elected representative and your legislators and let them know how you feel on these things. What's important to you, what's important to your community. It's really important for you to be active and advocating. I'm really proud of our coalition. We have a strong coalition. We represent over 100 tribes collectively. And, we're, I think, making sure that there's a voice there, but we don't think, and we know we're not the only ones with a voice, and we want to hear your voice. And I think that our legislators really do take it seriously when their constituents participate. So, I can't overemphasize that enough, that participation is key. And if you have concerns or questions, you can always reach out to Tlingit Haida, through our Facebook page. Here you go, right here, how to engage with the Alaska legislature, and I think we all want to be strong partners in making sure that you have your voice. So thank you for that. I'm gonna go ahead and Jordan to turn to some questions, and looking at them, a lot of them were actually answered, but we'll briefly go from our own Vice President Tasha Hodge. How is the separation of DHHS going to impact the budget? Aside from the communication challenges, we anticipate the cost of new admin for a new department at this time seems ridiculous. Well, right now we're in a state of limbo because the governor rescinded his directive, although the feeling is he's probably retooling it and will bring it back in another form. But Jordan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, at the surface on paper, it looks like it's a $5 million increase, but that also assumes a downsizing of personnel in the Division of Public Assistance, but some of that may be due to successful implementation of technologies that allow for addressing the application backlog. I mean, this is I'm trying to not word salad this answer, but it's hard to tell exactly. The long and the short of it is, though, that it appears that there's a relatively, at least as rolled out and in response to questions from stakeholders and lawmakers, what's roughly a wash.
Well, and I
But
think,
tell that to the, I don't know whether, the part of the issue, I think, over the last month or so is that folks raised their hand and said, how is this going to work? What does it really mean? What's the devil's in the details? Let's talk about that. And that's partly why we're where we are today.
well, and I think that's the question is, to us, it didn't look like there was enough investigation done before the proposal. A lot of questions couldn't be answered. For me, when I talk about 60% of the children in state OCS custody are Alaska Native children, look, we can't afford for you to experiment. You need to know those answers going in. How is this going to improve? Is it going to improve? We really just don't know. And that's a big problem for me.
Right.
So another question from Eileen Ostman, will you be sending out PFD early again this year like last year? Well, one, that's not us, that's the state. And we just don't know. Jordan, have you heard anything?
No. One thing I can tell you though is that with this $1.9 trillion federal COVID relief package that just passed the Senate yesterday, the U.S. Senate, right? This is heading to President Biden's desk for signature. It's one of the most significant pieces of legislation as it relates to kind of relief and steps toward recovery for the nation. Depending on who you ask, but it's real money coming to the state of Alaska. We're supposed to be seeing an additional $1 billion, I think, roughly out of that package. And it's completely conceivable that that money is going to relieve some of the pressure on the legislature and governor as they consider whether and how to not only pay for a flat budget, but also pay some dividend. So will it come soon? Will it come later? Will it come at all? I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you that there is a very decent chance that federal relief is really going to kind of find its way into a relief for budget architects. That being said, if we just kick the can one more year down the road without making substantial decisions and leadership decisions about how to address the state's fiscal situation, we're going to kick it 1 year into an election year. So it's not necessarily it'll be helpful right away, but it won't necessarily be helpful long term.
Yeah. Well, I know we're closing in on the end, and I want to get to a couple more questions. Some of these from Bernice Donnelly. How much did it cost to move over 200 jobs from Juneau to Anchorage? I don't know that we know those answers at all.
I'm sorry, I don't.
No.
I mean, we could look in the deep dive, the budget books that the Office of Management and Budget produces each year, and the Legislative Finance Division produces each year. Extraordinary detail like that can be found in those, and that the first place to start is State of Alaska's homepage, alaska.gov, and then find the Office of Management and Budget. Look for the FY22 proposed budget, and then whichever of those 200 jobs you're looking for, which department are they in, I don't know, but the answers is in there.
Right. From Michael Travis, what is DEED doing about compacting school tribes? There's been loose conversations, but I don't think there's any traction on anything in this legislative session. Tasha Hodge asked again about House Bill 123, but I think we answered that. Clarice Johnson, I'm curious if funding for the ferry system is also a legislative concern. Well, certainly for our legislators in Southeast, it is. I know that Senator Stedman has been pretty vocal about his displeasure about where things have been going, but they act like they're funding it. This is my own, I guess, opinion and piece, but to me, it comes down to management still. I think they're managing it into closure. Even when they fund it, our communities aren't getting the level of service that they deserve. that they not just deserve, desperately need. We leave, last year with no service for months. It left our communities extremely vulnerable. We have folks in our communities have health issues that can't just easily get it on an airplane. If they're on oxygen, they can't carry that on an airplane. So they need a ferry service. It just comes down to that. Again, I want to thank our partners. Our ARC team has been incredibly, I think, effective, gaining a lot of respect on the Hill. They reach out to us, ask us for testimony and things. And I just think Jordan's done a phenomenal job the last 5 years coordinating our group and making sure that we're on point and doing the things that we need to do. So again, that concludes our Q&A period. Continue to encourage you to track these bills and exercise your right to provide public testimony. Submit comments, reach out to your legislators, and don't forget to tune into Gavel, Alaska for live coverage of the legislation sessions and committee hearings. As we do every week, we have door prizes. This week for our Hydro Flask, we have Miranda Adams, and for our Form Line T-shirt, Mary Merino suits. Ladies, if you can send us in private message your addresses, we'll get those mailed out to you right away. And we just want to thank everybody again for tuning in and hearing us. Thank you again, Jordan Marshall, for being here. Don't forget to join us for our next virtual Native Issues Forum on March 25th to talk about our Indigenous Guardians program. And again, I want to thank the Tlingit Haida Regional Housing Authority and Sea Alaska for partnering and hosting these. Thank you all and be well.